My name is Clara. I draw children's books for a living. I blame the deadline, it almost did me in. If I hadn't been running on 3 hours of sleep in my 4th iced latte of the day, I might have noticed that the door I was pushing open belonged to a building that looked nothing like a cafe. But my brain was a fog of Pantone swatches and unfinished line art, and my laptop bag was digging into my shoulder, and the only thing I cared about was finding a corner table with a power outlet. So when the heavy oak door swung inward and I stepped into a room that smelled like expensive cologne and something metallic, blood, my hindbrain supplied too late, I didn't immediately register the absurdity. I registered the wrongness, the polished mahogany desk, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the 3 men in black suits standing like statues, and the woman in the center of it all holding a gun to a man's forehead. The man was on his knees, his face pressed to the desk, his shirt soaked with sweat or something darker. The woman, tall, sharp-shouldered, wearing a charcoal blazer that cost more than my monthly rent, had her arm extended, the barrel of a Sig Sauer pressed flush against his temple. She was saying something low and calm, like she was reading a grocery list. And you thought I wouldn't check the ledgers? You thought I'd miss 140,000, Sal? I dropped my iced latte. The cup hit the marble floor with a wet thwack, ice cubes skittering in every direction, brown liquid pooling around my sneakers. Every head in the room swiveled toward me. The 3 men reached for their waists. The woman with the gun did not move, except to tilt her head a fraction of an inch, her dark eyes sliding over me like she was cataloging a piece of furniture that had inexplicably walked in. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. My brain had finally caught up to my body and was now screaming run run run, but my legs had turned to gelatin. The woman, Valentina, I would learn later, lowered the gun with a sigh that suggested I was the greatest inconvenience she'd encountered all week. Who the fuck are you? I'm sorry, I thought this was, I pointed vaguely behind me. The cafe? The one with the blue awning? Silence. One of the suited men let out a small, disbelieving snort. Valentina didn't blink. She glanced at the man on the desk, then back at me, and I saw the calculation happen in real time, witness, civilian, problem. She raised the gun again. This time, it was pointed at me. You saw nothing, she said, and her voice was still calm, still patient, like she was explaining a traffic violation. You're going to walk out that door and forget this building exists. If you tell anyone. Her phone rang. It was a shrill, old-fashioned ringtone, the kind your grandmother used. Valentina's expression flickered, just a crack, just for a second, and she reached into her pocket with her free hand, pulling out a gold flip phone. She glanced at the screen, and something in her face softened almost imperceptibly. Nah, she said, answering. I'm in the middle of something. I couldn't hear the other end, but I saw Valentina's jaw tighten, then relax. She listened for a long moment, her eyes still on me, the gun still half raised. Then she said, marriage? Nah, we've talked about this. I don't have time for, yes, I know what the doctor said. No, I'm not, fine. I'll find someone. I'll bring them to dinner. Just, please take your medication. She hung up, exhaled through her nose, and looked at me again. This time, the calculation was different. Her gaze swept over my oversized hoodie, my frayed jeans, my laptop bag with a grease stain on the strap. She saw the artist's calluses on my fingers. She saw the way I was trembling, but also the way I hadn't run yet, frozen, yes, but not fleeing. What's your name? She asked. Clara, I whispered. Clara Bennett. She gestured to one of her men, who stepped forward and snatched my wallet from my back pocket. He flipped through it, pulled out my ID, and handed it to Valentina. She read it, glanced at my face, read it again. No criminal record, she murmured, almost to herself. No outstanding warrants. 28 years old. Self-employed. She looked up. You're an artist? Illustrator, I corrected, then immediately regretted speaking. Valentina pocketed the gun. She walked around the desk, her heels clicking against the marble, and came to stand in front of me. She was taller than me by a good 3 inches. Up close, I could see the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the careful architecture of her cheekbones, the way her lipstick was a shade of red that said "Don't fuck with me" without saying a word. "Here's the situation," she said, folding her arms. "My grandmother is dying. Her only wish is to see me married before she goes. I don't have a partner, and I don't have time to find one through conventional means. But you," she tilted her head, "you just walked into my office, witnessed something you shouldn't have, and now I have a decision to make." My mouth went dry. "Please don't kill me." "I wasn't going to kill you," she said, and I didn't believe her for a second. "I was going to threaten you, maybe have Dante follow you for a few weeks to make sure you kept your mouth shut. But now," she gestured at the phone in her hand. "Now, I have a better idea." "What idea?" "You're going to be my fiancé." I laughed. It was a hysterical, unhinged laugh that bubbled out of me like carbonation. "That's insane. I don't even know you." "You don't need to know me. You need to look convincing for 3 months. That's it. After Nana passes, which, according to her doctors, will be within the year, we dissolve the arrangement, you go back to your life, and I make sure you never want for anything again." She paused. "And I wipe your brother's debt." My laughter died. "What?" "Ethan Bennett. Twin brother. Regular at my underground poker games. He's currently $82,000 in the hole, and my collectors have been very patient, but patience runs out." She smiled, and it didn't reach her eyes. "So here's the deal, you play the part of my doting fiancé for 3 months. I erase his debt. You both walk away breathing. Or you refuse, I have you killed, quickly, I promise, and then I go to your brother and collect what he owes with interest. Your choice." I opened my mouth to say something, anything, and my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out reflexively. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. I answered. "Ethan?" "Clara, oh God, Clara, I'm so sorry." His voice was a wreck, cracked and sobbing. "They came to my apartment, they took my car, they said they'd break my legs if I didn't pay by Friday, and I don't have the money, I don't have anything, please, please, I know I'm a piece of shit, but I'm your brother, you're all I have." I closed my eyes. The room tilted. $82,000. My brother, who had always been the reckless one, the one who chased horses and numbers and dreams that never came true. My brother, who had once held my hand when we were 6 and our parents were fighting in the next room, who had said "It's okay, Clara, we'll be fine," even though we both knew we weren't. "I'll take care of it," I heard myself say. "Just stay where you are. Don't do anything stupid." I hung up. I looked at Valentina. She was watching me with the patient expression of someone who already knew the outcome. 3 months, I said. "And you wipe his debt?" Completely. Completely. "And I don't have to, I mean, you don't expect me to." I gestured vaguely between us. Valentina's lips twitched, the closest thing to amusement I'd seen from her. "You'll have to hold my hand. You'll have to sit close to me at dinner. You'll have to call me darling in front of my grandmother and not flinch. That's the extent of the physical demands. You're not my type." I didn't ask what her type was. I didn't want to know. "Fine," I said. "I'll do it." She extended her hand. I stared at it, long fingers, perfectly manicured nails, a silver ring on her middle finger that looked like it could double as a weapon. I shook it. Her grip was firm, cool, and utterly businesslike. "Welcome to the family," she said. Chapter 2. The first thing Valentina did was confiscate my phone. "Until I know you're not going to call the police or your brother or anyone else," she explained, handing it to Dante, the largest of her bodyguards, a man with a shaved head and kind eyes that seemed wildly out of place in his line of work. "You'll get it back at the end of each day, under supervision. For now, you're staying in the penthouse." "Penthouse?" "You can't go back to your apartment. Your brother's creditors might follow you there, and we need to keep you clean. Besides, you need training." "Training?" I didn't like the sound of that. The penthouse was on the top floor of a glass and steel skyscraper overlooking the river. I'd seen buildings like this from the street, never imagining I'd step inside one. The apartment was all clean lines and neutral tones, floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city look like a diorama, and a kitchen that had never been cooked in. I felt like a grubby moth trapped in a crystal jar. Dante showed me to a guest room, spacious, minimalist, with a bed so soft I sank into it like quicksand. He left me there with a stack of clothes that had been delivered while we were driving over, silk blouses, tailored trousers, a black cocktail dress that looked like it cost more than my car. Not that I had a car. I had a bicycle. Miss Valentina will see you in the living room at 7, Dante said, his voice surprisingly gentle. She wants to go over the ground rules. And Clara, he paused at the door. She's not as cold as she seems. Just, careful. She held a gun to my head. She didn't pull the trigger, he said, and left. I spent the next hour staring at the clothes, trying to remember the last time I'd worn anything that wasn't paint-stained cotton. I settled on a cream-colored blouse and a pair of black trousers that fit me eerily well. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize myself. I looked like someone's assistant. Someone's very overpaid assistant. Valentina was waiting in the living room, a glass of wine in her hand. She'd changed out of her blazer into a silk camisole and tailored trousers, her hair loose around her shoulders. Without the armor, she looked younger, not softer, but closer to human. Sit, she said, gesturing to the sofa across from her. Sit. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Good. You clean up well. That's important. What is this, a job interview? In a way. She set down her glass and leaned forward, elbows on her knees. Let me be clear about the rules. First, you will never, under any circumstances, be alone with my grandmother. I'll be present for every visit. Second, you will not discuss your brother, your debt, or the arrangement with anyone, not my staff, not my family, not the press. Third, you will follow my lead at all times. If I say we've been dating for 6 months, you agree. If I say we met at a gallery opening, you agree. Do you understand? I nodded. Good. Now, the schedule. We have our first family dinner tomorrow night. My grandmother, my aunt, my cousin Marcella, and a few of the senior family members. You will be introduced as my fiancé. You will smile, you will be charming, and you will not, under any circumstances, drink more than 1 glass of wine. Why not? Because you're nervous, and nervous people say stupid things when they're drunk. Also, Marcella will be watching you like a hawk. She's my cousin, my father's brother's daughter. She's been positioning herself to take over the family business since I was 16. She'd love nothing more than to catch me in a lie. Valentina's voice hardened. So you will be perfect. Any questions? I had about 100, but I settled for, what if your grandmother asks something I don't know the answer to? Like how we met, or where we're going on our honeymoon. Valentina smiled, a thin, sharp thing. You let me do the talking. If she asks you directly, you smile and say, Valentina tells the story better. Then you look at me with adoring eyes. Can you do that? I can try. Try harder. The first 3 days in the penthouse were a study in careful avoidance. Valentina worked from her study behind closed doors. I stayed in my guest room, sketching on my tablet, trying to pretend I wasn't a hostage with better thread count. Dante brought me meals, eggs in the morning, salads at noon, pasta at night, and each time I asked if I could leave the room, he gave me the same apologetic shrug. Miss Valentina says not yet. Miss Valentina can go, I stopped myself. He didn't deserve that. On the 4th night, I couldn't take it anymore. I crept out of my room at 2 a.m., barefoot, craving something real, not the cold perfection of the penthouse kitchen, but a cup of tea, a piece of toast, the kind of mundane ritual that reminded me I was still human. I found the kitchen in darkness. I found Valentina in it too. She was sitting at the island counter in a silk robe, her hair loose and tangled, a half-empty glass of red wine in front of her. No makeup. No armor. She looked up when I walked in, and for a second, her face was open in a way I hadn't seen before, startled, almost young. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Couldn't pretend I'm not hungry?" I opened the fridge. It was immaculate, stocked with things I couldn't name. "Do you have bread?" "Somewhere." I found a loaf, sliced it, put it in the toaster. While I waited, I leaned against the counter and looked at her. She didn't look away. "You don't sleep much," I said. "Neither do you." "I'm usually up drawing deadlines. I'm usually up thinking problems." The toast popped. I buttered it, broke off a piece, and slid it across the counter toward her. She looked at it like I'd offered her a grenade. "It's just toast," I said. "Not a peace offering. Just toast." She took a small bite. Chewed slowly. Then she reached into the cupboard and pulled out a jar of jam, strawberry, homemade, the label in someone's handwriting. "Nana sends a case every month," she said. "She thinks I don't eat." I spread jam on my toast and took a bite. It was the best thing I'd had in days. We sat there in the dim light, eating in silence, and it was strange, not uncomfortable, just real. Two people who didn't trust each other, sharing toast at 2 a.m. because neither of them knew how to stop being awake. "I used to have insomnia," I said, without meaning to. "When we were kids. My parents fought a lot. Ethan would sneak into my room and read comic books to me until I fell asleep." "Your brother." Her voice was flat. "He's the one who got you into this." "Into this?" "He's the reason I'm alive." I set down my toast. "He wasn't always like this. He used to be the one who held things together. When our parents split, he was the one who made me laugh. He made me feel like we'd be okay. I think he just never learned how to stop chasing the next thing. The next bet. The next rush." Valentina was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My father died when I was 11. My mother remarried within a year. I didn't cry at either wedding." She said it like it was a fact, not a wound. "Nana was the one who taught me how to read a room. How to hold a gun. How to make a man twice my size afraid to look me in the eye." "Did she teach you how to make toast?" Valentina blinked. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, a short, surprised sound, like she'd forgotten she could make it. "No," she said. "I learned that myself." I smiled. She saw it and looked away, but not before I caught the faintest softening at the corner of her mouth. We finished the toast. I washed the plate. When I turned back, she was still there, watching me with an expression I couldn't name. "Good night, Clara," she said. "Good night, Valentina." I walked back to my room and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I couldn't stop replaying the sound of her laugh. It was small. It was brief. But it was hers, something she hadn't meant to give me. I fell asleep thinking about that laugh, and for the first time in days, I didn't dream about guns. Dinner the next night was at a villa outside the city, a sprawling estate with ivy-covered walls and a fountain in the courtyard that spouted water shaped like dolphins. I felt like I'd wandered onto a film set. Everyone was dressed in silk and linen, their laughter polite and measured, their eyes scanning me like I was a painting they were trying to appraise. Nana Rosalba was the center of it all. She was smaller than I'd expected, a wizened woman in a wheelchair, her white hair pulled back in a bun, her hands gnarled with age but her eyes sharp as flint. She wore a purple shawl and a strand of pearls that must have been worth a small fortune. When I was introduced to her, she took my hand in both of hers and held it, studying my face with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "So you're the girl who stole my Valentina's heart," she said, her voice a dry rustle. "Tell me, Clara, what do you see in her?" I glanced at Valentina, who was watching me with a carefully neutral expression. I remembered the script, "You let me do the talking." But Nana had asked me directly, and the room was waiting. "She's kind," I said, and it came out more honest than I'd intended. She doesn't show it easily, but she cares about the people she loves. She takes care of them. She's the kind of person who would move mountains for someone if they asked her to, even if she'd never admit it. Nana's eyes crinkled. You see that, do you? Yes, I said, and I realized I meant it. I'd only known Valentina for 24 hours, but I'd seen the way she'd answered her grandmother's call, the softening in her voice, the way she'd set aside a gun to take a phone call from an old woman. That wasn't acting. That was real. Nana patted my hand and released it. You'll do, she said, and the room seemed to exhale. Marcella, seated across the table, did not look convinced. She was tall and blonde, with Valentina's sharp features but none of her stillness. She toyed with her wineglass, her eyes darting between me and Valentina like she was searching for a loose thread. So, Marcella said, her voice syrupy, how did you two meet? Valentina's been so secretive about you. It's almost like you appeared out of nowhere. We met at a gallery, I said, sticking to the script. A friend of mine had a show, and Valentina happened to be there. I was so nervous I spilled wine on her dress. And she didn't have you killed? Marcella laughed. I forced a smile. She was surprisingly forgiving. Valentina placed her hand over mine on the table, a deliberate, public gesture. Her fingers were cool and dry, and they settled over my knuckles like they belonged there. Clara has a way of disarming people, she said, and her gaze flicked to Marcella with something that looked like warning. Don't you think, cousin? Marcella's smile didn't waver, but something in her eyes sharpened. I think she's very charming, she said. Almost too charming. Dinner continued, but I felt Marcella's gaze on me for the rest of the night, a thread of unease woven through every course. Nana, meanwhile, asked me about my work, my illustrations, my process, what I loved about color. She was surprisingly knowledgeable about art. She named a few painters I'd never heard of, and I felt a genuine spark of connection. My husband was a collector, she said, touching the pearl at her throat. He used to say that a painting tells you more about the artist than a biography ever could. I think that's true of people, too. You can tell a lot about someone by the way they see the world. She looked at me, and for a moment, I felt like she could see through every layer, the arrangement, the lies, the terror, and she approved anyway. It was disorienting, and oddly comforting. After dinner, as Valentina and I walked through the garden toward the car, I asked, does she know? Your grandmother? Valentina's stride didn't falter. Know what? That this isn't real. She stopped walking. The garden was quiet, the only sound the chirp of crickets and the distant hum of the city. She turned to face me, her expression unreadable. Nana is the smartest person in my family, she said. She knows a lot of things she doesn't say. But she wants this, me, married, settled, more than she wants the truth. So she will see what she wants to see. And you will give her that. And if she finds out? Then I'll deal with it. Her voice was flat, final. But she won't. Because you're going to be very, very convincing. She held my gaze for a moment longer, then turned and walked toward the car. I followed, my heart pounding. The night was warm, but I felt cold all over. Chapter 3. The training began the next morning. Valentina had hired a woman named Patricia, a former etiquette instructor to the diplomatic corps, to teach me how to eat, sit, walk, and speak like a woman who belonged in Valentina's world. Patricia was tiny, bird-like, and terrifying. She made me practice balancing a book on my head while walking in heels. She made me practice the correct angle for holding a champagne flute. She made me practice small talk, the weather, the opera, the latest art auction in London. You have to project ease, Patricia said, tapping my spine with a ruler. Even if you feel like you're drowning. Drowning is not elegant. I'm an illustrator, I said through gritted teeth. I spend most of my time hunched over a tablet in sweatpants. Then consider this your method acting. Valentina would watch from the doorway sometimes, a cup of coffee in her hand, her expression unreadable. I couldn't tell if she was amused or appalled. Once, when I stumbled and nearly fell, she set down her cup and walked over, steadying me with a hand on my elbow. "You're overthinking it," she said. "Your body knows how to be graceful. Stop fighting it." "Easy for you to say," I muttered. "You were born with posture." She almost smiled. "I was beaten with a ruler until I stood straight. But I don't recommend that method." She let go of my elbow, but her fingers lingered a second longer than necessary. I felt the ghost of them even after she'd walked away. The first video call with Nana was 2 weeks in. Valentina and I sat side by side on the penthouse sofa, angled toward the camera so that I was partially visible behind her shoulder. Nana's face filled the screen, her cheeks sunken but her eyes bright. "Clara, darling, are you eating enough? You look thin." "I'm eating fine, Nana," I said, which was a lie. I'd been too nervous to eat most days. "Valentina, is she lying to me?" Valentina's hand found my knee, squeezing once. "She's eating, Nana. I make sure of it." "Good," Nana said. "Now kiss her." I froze. Valentina's hand on my knee tightened. "Nana, we're on camera. I want to see you kiss her. It's a simple request. I'm a dying old woman." Valentina turned to me. Her face was perfectly composed, but her eyes were asking a question. "Can you do this?" I gave a tiny nod. She leaned in, and I met her halfway. It was not a real kiss, just a press of lips, chaste and quick, over in a second. But it sent a jolt through me anyway. Her lips were soft, and they tasted like mint, and when she pulled back, her eyes were darker than they'd been a moment before. Nana clapped her hands on the screen. "Beautiful. Now, tell me about the wedding. I want flowers, peonies, white and pink, and I want Clara in a dress that makes her look like a princess. None of that modern nonsense." "Nana, we haven't set a date yet." "Then set one." "I don't have much time, Valentina." "Do it for me." Valentina's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "We'll start planning." After the call ended, she went to the window and stood there, her back to me. The city lights reflected off the glass, and I could see her reflection, her head bowed, one hand pressed to the glass. "She's pushing," I said quietly. "She's testing us." "I know." Valentina's voice was hollow. "She wants to see if we break." "We won't break." She turned to look at me, and for the first time, I saw something raw in her face, not the mask, but the woman behind it. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You could have run. You could have refused. You could have gone to the police." "And your grandmother?" I said. "She's dying, Valentina. She wants to see you happy. Even if it's a lie, maybe it's not entirely a lie. Maybe I can be happy too." She didn't answer. She just looked at me for a long moment, and then she walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the weight of my own words. Chapter 4. The first time I saw her vulnerable was 3 weeks in. I was unpacking a box of art supplies I'd convinced Dante to retrieve from my apartment, sketches, pencils, watercolors, the tools of my trade, when I noticed a drawer in Valentina's study that was slightly ajar. I shouldn't have looked. I knew I shouldn't. But the drawer was right there, and curiosity has always been my undoing. Inside, under a stack of legal documents, was a piece of paper. I pulled it out gently. It was a child's drawing, crayon on construction paper, the colors faded but still vivid. A butterfly, with wings that were uneven and a body that was too thick. In the corner, in a child's wobbly handwriting, Valentina, age 6. My heart clenched. This woman, this cold, controlled woman, had once been a little girl who drew butterflies. She had once been full of color and clumsiness and joy. And then someone had taken that away, the family, the business, the life that demanded she be sharp and hard and untouchable. I put the drawing back, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, when Valentina was in the shower, I took the drawing out again. I didn't change it, I couldn't, but I took a sheet of watercolor paper and painted a response. A butterfly of my own, based on hers, but with wings filled with blues and golds and the softest pinks. I added a tiny sun in the corner, and a single flower at the bottom. I left it on her bedside table, tucked under the lamp. The next morning, I woke to find her standing in my doorway. She was still in her robe, her hair wet, her face unguarded. In her hand, she held the painting. "You did this," she said. It wasn't a question. I sat up, my heart racing. "I didn't mean to pry. I found the drawing in your drawer, and I thought you might like to see it again." "Not the original. A new one. From me?" She looked at the painting, then at me. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she took a step closer, and another, until she was standing beside my bed. She set the painting down on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the mattress. "I haven't drawn anything since I was 10, she said. "My father caught me sketching in a notebook. He tore it up and told me I had better things to do with my hands." "That's horrible." "It was practical." Her voice was flat, but her eyes were not. She was looking at the painting, at the colors I'd chosen, and something in her expression was cracking. I stopped wanting to draw after that. I stopped wanting a lot of things. "What did you want?" She met my eyes. "I don't remember." There was a silence between us, heavy with things unsaid. And then, without warning, she reached out and touched my face, her fingers brushing my cheek, so light I almost didn't feel it. "Thank you," she said, and it was the softest I'd ever heard her voice. She withdrew her hand and stood, walking out of the room with the painting tucked under her arm. I sat there, my face still warm from her touch, and realized that I had crossed a line. I didn't know which line, or where it led, but I knew there was no going back. Chapter 5. Nana's next request was the arcade. "I want you to go somewhere fun," she said on the video call, her eyes twinkling. "Somewhere young people go. An amusement park, maybe. And I want pictures. Real ones, happy ones." Valentina pinched the bridge of her nose. "Nana, we're not." "I'm dying, Valentina." "Do you want me to die unhappy?" Valentina sighed, defeated. "Fine. We'll go." She chose a small amusement park on the edge of the city, the kind with a Ferris wheel and a carousel and cotton candy that was more sugar than air. I tried not to show how nervous I was. I'd been terrified of heights since I was a child, and the Ferris wheel loomed over everything like a steel skeleton. But Valentina insisted. "Nana will want to see the view," she said, and I couldn't argue. We climbed into the gondola, and it lurched upward. I gripped the safety bar so hard my knuckles went white. The city spread out below us, a grid of lights and streets, and I felt my stomach drop with every swing of the wheel. "You're shaking," Valentina observed. "I am fine," I lied. The wheel stopped at the top, swaying gently. Valentina looked at me, and something shifted in her expression, not pity, but recognition. She reached over and took my hand, prying my fingers off the bar and threading them through hers. "Look at me," she said. I looked at her. Her eyes were steady, her grip firm. "You're not falling," she said. "You're here, with me. That's all that's happening." I took a shaky breath. The panic didn't disappear, but it receded, like a wave pulling back from the shore. I squeezed her hand, and she squeezed back. "Better?" she asked. "Better," I said. We stayed like that for the rest of the ride, hands clasped, neither of us speaking. When the wheel finally brought us back to the ground, we didn't let go right away. It was a beat, then two, before Valentina released me and stepped out of the gondola. That night, I lay in bed, replaying the moment in my head. The feeling of her fingers between mine. The way she'd said "you're with me" like it was a solid truth, unshakable. I was in trouble. I knew it. But I didn't know what to do about it. Chapter 6. The wedding planning was a nightmare. Nana had decided that the wedding would be in 6 weeks. She'd had a premonition that she wouldn't last past autumn, and she wanted to see the ceremony before she went. Valentina and I were forced into a series of meetings with a wedding planner named Joseph, a man with a perpetually worried expression and a color-coded binder. "The flowers," he said, flipping to a page. Nana insists on white peonies and blush roses. But Miss Valentina, you told me you preferred something more minimal, perhaps a monochromatic palette. Valentina frowned. I don't care about the flowers. Do what Nana wants. But the aesthetic. I said I don't care. I care, I interjected. I'm the one who's going to be holding them. I'd like to at least like them. Valentina looked at me sharply. You want a say in this? It's my wedding too, I said, and I didn't realize how true it sounded until the words left my mouth. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned to Joseph. Fine. Clara chooses the flowers. I'll be in my office. She walked out, and I was left with Joseph and a binder full of blooms. I chose peonies, but pale yellow instead of white, softer, warmer, more like the colors I used in my illustrations. I also chose eucalyptus, because I liked the smell, and small white lilies for the centerpieces. Joseph nodded, making notes. Very unconventional, he said. But I think Nana will approve. I hoped she would. I was starting to care about her approval, and that scared me. The fight over the flowers came 2 days later. Valentina found the final selections on my desk and stormed into the study where I was working. Yellow peonies, she said, her voice cold. We agreed on white. We didn't agree on anything. You said I could choose. I meant within reason. Yellow is not within reason. It's not appropriate. It's a wedding, not a funeral, I snapped. I'm allowed to have an opinion. You can't just dictate everything. I can dictate everything, she said, stepping closer. This is my world, Clara. My family. You're just. She stopped. I saw her realize what she was about to say. I saw the words just a hired actress hanging in the air between us. I'm just what? I asked, my voice shaking. She didn't answer. She turned away, her shoulders rigid. You think I don't know that? I said. You think I forget, even for a second, that this is a transaction? That I'm here because of my brother's debt and your grandmother's dying wish? I know exactly what I am to you, Valentina. But that doesn't mean I can't have an opinion about flowers. She spun back. Her face was a mask, but her eyes were blazing. You don't know what you're talking about. Then tell me. Tell me what I don't know. We were inches apart, both breathing hard. The air between us crackled with something that wasn't anger, or wasn't only anger. I saw her gaze flicker to my lips, and I felt my own heart stutter. And then she kissed me. It was not like the first time, that brief, chaste press for the camera. This was real, her hand cupping my jaw, her body pressing me back against the desk, her mouth open and hungry. I made a sound, a gasp, a whimper, and she swallowed it, kissed me harder. I kissed her back. I couldn't help it. My hands fisted in her silk blouse, pulling her closer, and she made a low noise in her throat that sent heat straight through me. When we broke apart, we were both breathing like we'd run a marathon. Valentina's eyes were dark, her lips pink and wet. She looked at me, and I saw the walls come back up, slowly, brick by brick. That shouldn't have happened, she said. It didn't, I said, my voice raw. We're still acting, right? She didn't answer. She stepped back, straightened her blouse, and walked out of the room. I stood there for a long time, my hand pressed to my mouth, tasting her lipstick. Chapter 7. Marcella struck the week after. She called a family council, a formal gathering of the senior members of the Valenti family, and presented a dossier. It contained everything: Ethan's gambling records, his debts, his connection to Valentina's casinos, and a detailed timeline that placed Clara at the center of a suspiciously convenient arrangement. She's a plant, Marcella declared, her voice ringing through the boardroom. Valentina bought her. Bought her silence, bought her complicity, bought a fake marriage to appease Nana. This is fraud, and it's an insult to this family. The elders murmured among themselves. I sat in the corner, my heart pounding, while Valentina stood at the head of the table, her face carved from ice. Marcella, Valentina said, you're accusing me of deceiving Nana. That's a serious charge. It's not a charge, it's the truth. I have the paperwork. I have the witnesses. I have your own security footage of the day you brought her here, the day she walked in off the street and you decided to make her your puppet. Nana, seated at the far end of the table in her wheelchair, said nothing. She looked at Valentina, then at me, and I felt her gaze like a weight. Is this true? She asked. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. Valentina opened her mouth. I saw her hesitation, a fraction of a second, and I knew she was about to lie, to spin it, to protect herself. I stood up. Yes, I said. The room went silent. It started as a lie, I said, my voice trembling but clear. I walked into that office by accident. Valentina offered me a deal, play the fiancé, erase my brother's debt. I took it because I was scared. Because I love my brother, even though he's an idiot. Because I didn't see any other way. I pulled out the tablet I'd been hiding under my jacket. I'd spent the entire night before drawing, not sleeping, pouring everything I felt into images. I connected it to the room's display screen. But that's not how it ended, I said. And I want to show you what happened after. The first image appeared, me at the door, coffee spilling, Valentina with her gun. Then the training, the dinner, the video calls. The butterfly painting. The amusement park, our hands intertwined. The kiss in the study, I didn't draw that, not exactly, but I drew the feeling of it, two people leaning toward each other in a room full of light. I drew Valentina laughing for the first time, a small, surprised laugh when I tripped over my own feet at the charity gala. I drew her holding Nana's hand, her face softened. I drew her in the garden at dawn, watching the sunrise, not knowing I was watching her. And I drew the night before, when we'd stood on the balcony and she'd said, I don't know what I'll do when this is over, and I'd said, you don't have to decide that now. I drew her eyes, surprised, like she'd never heard anyone say that before. The last image was a portrait, Valentina, not as the queen of her empire, but as a woman whose armor had cracked. And underneath, I'd written, I started pretending, but I stopped pretending somewhere along the way. This is real. We are real. I turned to face the elders. I don't have proof that satisfies lawyers or accountants, I said. But I have this. And I hope you can see that it's the truth. The silence was absolute. And then Nana began to clap. Slowly, deliberately, her frail hands coming together. One by one, the elders joined her. Marcella's face contorted with fury, but she was outnumbered. Valentina had not moved. She was staring at me, and I had never seen her look so unguarded. Her eyes were wet, not crying, not quite, but close. I never asked you to do that, she said, her voice barely a whisper. You didn't have to, I said. Chapter 8. Marcella's downfall came swiftly. Valentina had been waiting for her moment, and the council gave her the opening. She produced evidence of Marcella's own embezzlement, funds diverted to a rival organization, deals made behind the family's back. Marcella was stripped of her titles and banished from the family's inner circle, her schemes exposed to the light. That night, Valentina and I stood on the penthouse balcony, the city sprawling beneath us. She handed me a glass of wine, and we drank in silence. You saved me, she said. I drew a cartoon. You stood up. In front of everyone. You told them the truth, that it was a lie, and then it wasn't. She turned to look at me. No one has ever done that for me. Maybe no one ever had the chance. She smiled, a real smile, small and uncertain. I've been thinking, she said. About what happens next. Me too. I'm not going to run the family forever. I've been in this life my whole life, and I'm tired of it. She set down her glass. There's a building downtown. An old warehouse. I bought it last month. I thought maybe it could be something else. An art gallery, maybe. Somewhere people can show their work. Your work. Hier. Are you serious? I'm not good at saying things, she said, stepping closer. I'm not good at being soft. But I'm good at making things happen. And I want to make this happen. I want to make us happen. She took my face in her hands, gently, like I was something precious. I love you, Clara. I don't know when it started, and I don't know how to stop it. I don't want to stop it. I kissed her then, and she kissed me back, and the city kept turning below us, unaware that two women had just found each other in the wreckage of a lie. Chapter 9. The wedding was small, just family, just friends, just the people who mattered. Nana wore a lavender dress and held my hand through the entire ceremony, her grip surprisingly firm. Ethan was there, sober and clean, and he cried when he walked me down the aisle. Valentina was in a white suit, tailored to perfection, her hair loose around her shoulders. When she saw me in my dress, simple, elegant, with yellow peonies in my bouquet, her breath caught audibly. You're beautiful, she said, and she meant it. You're not so bad yourself, I said, and she laughed. We said our vows. I wrote mine on a scrap of paper the night before, but I didn't need it. I spoke from my heart, about the door that opened, about the fear that turned to courage, about the woman who taught me that love doesn't always arrive the way you expect. Valentina spoke too, haltingly, her voice rough with emotion. She talked about the drawing I'd left on her nightstand. She talked about the butterfly, and how I'd taught her to see color again. You painted my world back, she said. And I don't want to live without you. Nana presented the rings, her own wedding rings, worn thin and warm from decades of wear. She placed them in our palms and whispered, now you're real. After the ceremony, we danced in the garden, and I noticed Nana watching us from her wheelchair, a small smile on her face. She caught my eye and gave a little nod, approval, or maybe satisfaction. Chapter 10. A year later, I found the note. I was cleaning out my old wallet, the one I'd been carrying the day I walked into Valentina's office, when a piece of paper fell out. It was folded neatly, the edges soft with age. I opened it, expecting a receipt or a forgotten shopping list. Instead, in a spidery, elegant hand, it read, "A wrong door is fate. Walking through it is courage." I stared at it. The handwriting was unmistakable. I'd seen it in the cards she sent, the letters she wrote to Valentina. Nana's handwriting. I took the note to the living room. Valentina was there, on the floor with our new dog, a rescued pit bull we'd named Ethan Jr., much to my brother's chagrin. She was scratching his belly, laughing at his contented grunts. Val, I said, holding out the note. Look at this. She read it. Her smile faded. Nana, she said. She knew all along. The door that was unlocked that day. The phone call. The timing of everything. I sat down beside her, my heart pounding. She planned it. She planned us. Valentina was quiet for a long moment. Then she laughed, a real laugh, surprised and warm. That old woman, she said. She played us both. Are you angry? She looked at me, her eyes soft. How could I be angry? She gave me you. I leaned into her, and the dog scrambled into my lap, wagging his tail. The sun was setting outside, casting the room in golden light. I thought about the door I'd walked through, the fear that had gripped me, the choice I'd made despite every instinct screaming at me to run. I thought about Valentina, who had held a gun to my head and ended up holding my heart instead. It hadn't been a mistake. It had been a beginning, the most unlikely, chaotic, wonderful beginning I could have ever imagined. And somewhere, I imagined Nana Rosalba smiling, her work complete. The first 3 days in the penthouse were a study in careful avoidance. Valentina worked from her study behind closed doors. I stayed in my guest room, sketching on my tablet, trying to pretend I wasn't a hostage with better thread count. Dante brought me meals, eggs in the morning, salads at noon, pasta at night, and each time I asked if I could leave the room, he gave me the same apologetic shrug. Miss Valentina says not yet. Miss Valentina can go, I stopped myself. He didn't deserve that. On the fourth night, I couldn't take it anymore. I crept out of my room at 2 a.m., barefoot, craving something real, not the cold perfection of the penthouse kitchen, but a cup of tea, a piece of toast, the kind of mundane ritual that reminded me I was still human. I found the kitchen in darkness. I found Valentina in it too. She was sitting at the island counter in a silk robe, her hair loose and tangled, a half-empty glass of red wine in front of her. No makeup. No armor. She looked up when I walked in, and for a second, her face was open in a way I hadn't seen before, startled, almost young. Couldn't sleep, she asked. Couldn't pretend I'm not hungry. I opened the fridge. It was immaculate, stocked with things I couldn't name. Do you have bread? Somewhere. I found a loaf, sliced it, put it in the toaster. While I waited, I leaned against the counter and looked at her. She didn't look away. You don't sleep much, I said. Neither do you. I'm usually up drawing. Deadlines. I'm usually up thinking. Problems. The toast popped. I buttered it, broke off a piece, and slid it across the counter toward her. She looked at it like I'd offered her a grenade. It's just toast, I said. Not a peace offering. Just toast. She took a small bite. Chewed slowly. Then she reached into the cupboard and pulled out a jar of jam, strawberry, homemade, the label in someone's handwriting. Nana sends a case every month, she said. She thinks I don't eat. I spread jam on my toast and took a bite. It was the best thing I'd had in days. We sat there in the dim light, eating in silence, and it was strange, not uncomfortable, just real. Two people who didn't trust each other, sharing toast at 2 a.m. because neither of them knew how to stop being awake. I used to have insomnia, I said, without meaning to. When we were kids. My parents fought a lot. Ethan would sneak into my room and read comic books to me until I fell asleep. Your brother. Her voice was flat. He's the one who got you into this. Into this? He's the reason I'm alive. I set down my toast. He wasn't always like this. He used to be the one who held things together. When our parents split, he was the one who made me laugh. He made me feel like we'd be okay. I think he just never learned how to stop chasing the next thing. The next bet. The next rush. Valentina was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, my father died when I was 11. My mother remarried within a year. I didn't cry at either wedding. She said it like it was a fact, not a wound. Nana was the one who taught me how to read a room. How to hold a gun. How to make a man twice my size afraid to look me in the eye. Did she teach you how to make toast? Valentina blinked. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, a short, surprised sound, like she'd forgotten she could make it. No, she said. I learned that myself. I smiled. She saw it and looked away, but not before I caught the faintest softening at the corner of her mouth. We finished the toast. I washed the plate. When I turned back, she was still there, watching me with an expression I couldn't name. Good night, Clara, she said. Good night, Valentina. I walked back to my room and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I couldn't stop replaying the sound of her laugh. It was small. It was brief. But it was hers, something she hadn't meant to give me. I fell asleep thinking about that laugh, and for the first time in days, I didn't dream about guns. Chapter 11. 2 years after the wedding, we opened the gallery. Valentina had bought the old warehouse on Riverside, 3 stories of exposed brick and crumbling skylights, The kind of space that made my illustrator's heart skip. She gave me free rein with the design, warm whites on the walls, soft amber lighting, a corner nook with beanbags and picture books for the kids who wandered in. I painted a mural on the back wall, a giant, colorful butterfly, wings spread wide, its flight path curving up toward the skylight. "This is ridiculous," I said the day we hung the opening sign. "I'm an illustrator. I draw foxes and bunnies. I don't know the first thing about running a gallery." Valentina wrapped an arm around my waist from behind. She was wearing paint-stained overalls, my paint-stained overalls, and she'd never looked more beautiful. "You'll learn," she said. "And when you can't, I'll handle it. That's what partners do." Partners. I still got a thrill every time she said it. The gallery opened with a small exhibition, local artists, friends from my old life, a few names Valentina's connections had wrangled. We sold 7 pieces that first week, nothing major, but enough to cover the electric bill. I framed the receipt and put it on our refrigerator, right next to a photo of Ethan Jr. wearing a bow tie. Speaking of Ethan, my brother had found his feet. He'd been sober for 18 months, working as a trainee counselor at a rehab center across town. He still had the same crooked smile, the same reckless charm, but now there was something solid beneath it. He came to the gallery opening with a bouquet of sunflowers and a nervous laugh. "Clara, I know I don't say it enough, but," he started. "You don't have to say it," I said. "Just don't bet on anything." "Not even your marriage?" I punched his arm. He hugged me, tight and real, and I hugged him back. Valentina watched from across the room, a glass of champagne in her hand. I caught her eye and mouthed, "Are you okay?" She nodded. But something in her expression was off, a flicker of unease, quickly hidden. I found out why that night. "I have a meeting tomorrow," she said, as we were getting ready for bed. "Old business. One of Nana's estate lawyers." "Nana's estate? But she's not dead." Valentina sat down on the edge of the bed. "But she's been making arrangements. For years, apparently. I found out last week that she left something for me. Something she wanted me to open after the gallery opened." He sat beside her. "What is it?" "I don't know. The lawyer's coming tomorrow." The lawyer arrived at 10 in the morning, a small, round man with half-moon glasses and a leather briefcase that looked older than me. He set it down on Valentina's desk and produced a sealed envelope, thick with official seals. "Ms. Rosalba instructed me to deliver this upon the successful opening of your gallery," he said. "She also wanted me to convey her congratulations." Valentina opened the envelope. Inside was a deed, ownership papers for the building we were sitting in. The deed had her name on it, and mine, and a small, handwritten note in Nana's spidery script. "The butterfly learned to fly in a cage. You learn to fly in the world. Keep going." Beneath the note, there was a second envelope, addressed to me. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, a single photograph, old and faded, of a young woman in a paint-splattered smock, standing in front of an easel. She was beautiful, her hair wild, her smile bright. On the back, in that same spidery hand, "Your grandmother, Nana's first love." I looked up at Valentina. She was staring at the photo, her eyes wet. "She was an artist," I said. "Nana's first love was an artist." Valentina nodded slowly. "She never told me. That's why she chose me. Not just because I was convenient. Because I reminded her of someone she loved." We stood there in the empty gallery, surrounded by paintings and light, and I realized that Nana had been playing the long game all along, not just for Valentina's sake, but for mine. She'd seen something in me that I hadn't even seen in myself. And she'd given me the thing I never knew I needed, a woman who saw color in my world. That evening, I painted. Not for a deadline, not for a client, just for me. I painted Nana's face, the way she'd looked when she'd held my hand at the wedding, ancient, tired, and incandescent with joy. I painted the butterfly Valentina drew at 6, the one I'd colored in, the one that now hung in our bedroom. And I painted Valentina, not as the queen of her empire, but as the woman who had learned to laugh at 2 a.m. over toast and jam. When I was done, I hung the painting in the gallery. I put a small placard beneath it, for Nana Rosalba, who knew that a wrong door was just the right kind of fate. Valentina came up behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For walking through that door." I turned in her arms and kissed her. The city hummed outside, oblivious. The dog snored in the corner. And somewhere, I imagined Nana Rosalba smiling, her work finally, completely done.